Howdy folks, welcome back to Cray Outdoors. This was a fairly heavily requested video. I get questions all the time asking how it is that I rig up my tip-ups when I'm ice fishing. I know ice fishing it's growing in popularity as a sport, as a way to catch fish, so no surprise lots of people are asking questions on how you rig tip-ups to catch different stuff. So in this video I'm going to be going over all of the different rigs that I use when I'm ice fishing on tip-ups to catch a multitude of different species. By no means do I claim to be an ice fishing expert. There's a lot of people that catch a lot more fish than I do on tip-ups in my area, and even up in the Adirondacks where I learned how to ice fish. There were people there that caught a lot more fish than me and my friends. So I'm still learning, but if you're a beginner, this video will definitely get you started. Even if you're not a beginner, hopefully you'll learn something. There will be a new rig or something, or some tricks and techniques that you can pick up on. Let's get into it. So real quick, we'll go over how to set the tip up and how the tip up works. I'm guessing most of you know this much, so we're gonna fly, but just in case you're a total beginner, this is a tip up. Basically, you're gonna take this device, the flag's gonna be up like that, and you're going to set the flag like so. There's a little trigger spindle here. I don't know if that's the proper word for it or not, but this thing, and there's two settings on here. There's like the heavy setting, and on the other side there's the light setting. 99% of the time I'm keeping it on the heavy setting. A lot of times when I'm fishing for pike and stuff, you're using bait that will set off on the light setting, and you're more prone to wind flags and false flags. Most of the time you want to keep it on the heavy setting there. Most fish are not going to be discouraged by that tiny little bit of resistance in the beginning. The only time I ever have it on the light setting is if I'm fishing for extremely small fish, if I'm tip-up fishing for panfish or something like that, or if I'm tip-up fishing for wild trout. Wild trout and holdover trout can be very, very finicky. If it's a windy day, I have it on the heavy setting, but if it's a nice calm day, I'll put it on the light setting because, you know, lake trout can be super finicky, and wild trout, sometimes they will drop it for that little bit of resistance. Not always, but sometimes they will. That's the only time I ever have it on the light setting, and that was up in the Adirondacks. I mean, here in Western New York where I live now, we don't even have wild trout in any of our lakes around here. Anyway, other than like Lake Erie and yeah. Anyway, so that's how that works. Basically, you're going to set your flag on here. You're going to set this in the hole. Make sure that your spool here is under the water. The spool needs to be under the water, otherwise it will freeze up. It stays below the frost line, and I already just sort of showed you. The fish is going to come by, grab your bait here, and when the fish pulls on your bait, like so, it sets the flag up, and you'll get to your tip up, and this thing will be spinning if there's a fish on there. That means that the fish is here pulling on your bait, taking line, and that's always very, very exciting. One of the most exciting parts of ice fishing. Make sure when you set your tip up that you have the line going through this little thingy here. Otherwise, I'll show you real quick. If you don't have the line going through this thing, and there is a little there's a little hoop thing on this thing, so you don't need to like untie your rig. You can just kind of squeeze it through. You can just kind of squeeze it through this little notch right there. Make sure you're going through that little notch, otherwise your tip-up's not going to work properly. And these are, of course, newer style tip-ups. I don't like the old-fashioned style as much. This style, I'm not even going to go over these, but a lot of guys do prefer to use these tip-ups. There's a few advantages to them. The flag goes up higher, they're much cheaper, they're much lighter and smaller. You can fit like 20 of these things in a bucket, where these things you can't do that. So some people do prefer the older style tip-ups. I hate them. I like the newer ones, so that's why I'm sort of using the newer style tip-ups as the example, and as the examples in this video. So the most common bait that we're going to be running on our tip-ups is live minnows. There's a multitude of different baits that you can use. I mix it up sometimes, especially if I'm fishing for trout. Dead bait will work, especially if you don't have live bait available, but most of the time we're going to be using live minnows, and you know, for most species you pretty much use live minnows exclusively. So real quick, I'm going to show you the different ways that I rig minnows. Basically the same principles to using minnows open water fishing also apply to ice fishing. You can watch, there's a million different videos on how to rig minnows out there, but real quickly I'll show you the different ways I rig them. This here is a Berkeley gulp minnow, of course, not a real minnow. You can run Berkeley gulp minnows. Again, if live bait is not available, you can run Berkeley gulp minnows on tip-ups for walleye and trout and things. But real quick, the main ways I rig them is through the lips is a very common way. Many different people, will rig them. This is not easy watching the camera and trying to watch what I'm doing at the same time. Boom. Through the lips is probably, one of the most common ways people rig them ice fishing. I'd say most of the time people rig their minnows through the lips. My favorite way is actually to go through the back, through the dorsal fin. Of course, this doesn't have a dorsal fin on it, but go right under the dorsal fin and just sort of hide the back of the hook in the dorsal fin and have the hook going towards the head like so. Using this rig most of the time, I find that I'll hook toothy critters like walleye and pike in the mouth. So I like using this rig. It's also pretty effective for trout because you just sort of go right underneath that skin layer so the minnow will stay alive and kick around, and it really does a good job of hiding the hook. Again, this Berkeley gulp minnow doesn't have a fin on it, but yeah, most of the hook is sort of hidden by that dorsal fin. So yeah, that's the rig that I use most of the time. That's my favorite. You can also hook things through the back of the head like so, and this works because you can also string multiple minnows on there doing it that way, and just fill that hook with minnows. That's effective sometimes, especially for panfish, perch, and stuff. Just having a big ball of bait in there. You can also hook things through the back of the tail. There's another very common place to hook them. So yeah, those are the different ways you can rig minnows. Again, especially if I catch a live perch or something and use that as bait a lot of the time with a treble hook, I'll hook it in the back of the tail like that. The tail's a very effective place to catch pike and things like that. But yeah, a bunch of different ways you can rig minnows. There's really no right or wrong way. Just figured I'd show you guys real quick the different ways that I put minnows on the hook, because that's very, very relevant to tip-up fishing when you're ice fishing, because again, live minnows are the main bait we're going to be using tip-up fishing for multi-species. So first and foremost, we're going to go over the classic northern pike rig on tip-ups, which is simply a steel leader with a treble hook. It focuses on the treble hook there. Steel leader onto a treble hook with a heavy split shot, or two heavy split shots in this case. Typically when we're fishing for northern pike, we're using big bait, so you want to use a bigger hook, I usually use size 1 or size 2, or even like a 1 or 2/0, and you're going to be using a heavy weight because you're typically using big bait that you want to get down there. Pike are some of the less intelligent fish that you ice fish for. They're not very finicky, as opposed to trout and walleye, which can be very finicky sometimes. Pike are typically not very finicky. They're not usually discouraged by steel leaders. They're not discouraged by heavy weight. They're not discouraged by treble hooks. So yeah, you can basically pretty much throw anything at them, and the most effective way to hook them and get your bait down there nice and fast and have them not bite through your line is going to be treble hook, steel leader, and heavy weight. You can also use a single hook. Sometimes I use single hooks because, I don't know, I just feel like you can rig the bait a little bit better. It looks a little bit more natural if the pike are being finicky that day. It's the classic northern pike rig. You're, again, typically using big bait, big, large golden shiners. Suckers are, some of the most common pike bait. Most of the time what I do is I just jig up a little perch or rock bass or whatever I can jig up and throw that on as bait. And contrary to popular belief, that is perfectly legal to do in New York State, as of now anyway. And it's legal most places. But definitely check your local regulations. Make sure it's legal to do where you're at. They can't be transferred over land, and they can't be transported in a motor vehicle. But it is perfectly legal to jig up a perch and use it as bait. That's what I do most of the time because large shiners and suckers cost quite a bit of money. But again, pike are not very finicky. You can throw hot dogs and go to the grocery store and sardines in case you don't jig anything up. Pretty much anything will work for pike. You can throw anything on one of those hooks. Some guys say use only dead bait for northern pike. I am a believer that something that's struggling on the hook attracts a little bit more attention. I prefer to use live bait of some sort, but yeah, again, northern pike, you typically want something bigger, and I prefer something alive as well. So yeah, that's northern pike. Pretty easy, pretty simple. One of the easier fish to catch on tip-ups ice fishing for sure. So the next rig that we are going to go over is the rig that I use when I'm tip-up fishing for bass and walleye. Basically, we've just got a regular bait holder hook on a 15-pound test fluorocarbon leader, a little sinker in the middle somewhere. We're using medium-sized split shot as opposed to pike where we are using large split shot. And then we've got a barrel swivel and another medium split shot above that tied to our main line. I like using a barrel swivel. Walleye like to twist and turn a lot. Having twisted, mangled tip-up line is going to lead to a lot of headaches. So I like having the barrel swivel on there. That way you don't need to tie that annoying double whatever knot either. It's easier to tie knots that way, and your tip-up line is going to get a lot less tangled. Definitely suggest using a swivel. And 15-pound test, fluorocarbon, that's strong enough to pull a bass or a walleye through the hole, and it's also thick enough where a walleye's teeth are not going to bite through it. So yeah, that's how I rig tip-ups for bass and walleye. For bass and walleye especially, I like to go just off the bottom. I'm usually 1 or 2 cranks off the bottom for walleye. Up to 2 feet off the bottom, but definitely never go more than 2 feet off the bottom. Again, walleye I like to go just 1 or 2 cranks. And that's usually, in general, that's the area you want to be with your tip-ups for multi-species fishing. Most fish relate to the bottom structure. But bass can suspend in the water column too, so bass you can experiment a little bit with. Walleye you typically always want to be just off the bottom. And yeah, that's my bass and walleye rig. This is the final rig I'm going to show you. This is the rig that I use for trout and panfish, and it's essentially the same thing as the walleye rig, just on a smaller scale. We've got a light leader. This is an 8-pound test fluorocarbon leader. You can also use 6 or 10-pound test. We're using small split shots, smallest you can get, tied onto a much smaller barrel swivel, and again another small split shot above that. So this is the rig that I use for trout and panfish. Your hook size is going to vary depending on the bait you're using. Most of the time we're going to have on a small hook. As I mentioned, trout, I like to vary my bait a little bit more. I'll use power bait, I'll use butterworms, I'll use night crawlers. But if you're using minnows, I usually actually use medium-sized minnows for trout. For panfish, we're using very, very small minnows. So again, we want a small hook. But trout, again, depending on the size minnows or the size bait you're using, your hook size will vary. This, I believe, is a size 8 hook that is on there at the moment. Again, that's what we're going to be using for, bugs, night crawlers, power bait, and small minnows. But I will use, a size 4 for medium minnows and, a size 2 for larger minnows. If you're targeting lake trout, you can use, giant bait. Again, if you're targeting big lake trout, I'd maybe suggest bumping it up to a 10-pound test leader, but all up to you. I prefer to use fluorocarbon. You can use mono. Mono, the one advantage to that is monofilament line will stretch, and you really need to remember that your main line is going to be significantly stronger than your leader line. So if you have a monofilament leader, sometimes you can feel it stretching a little bit, so you know if you're gripping your main line too hard. But otherwise, I like to use fluorocarbon. It's harder for the fish to see. It's got the same reflective properties as water. Gives you a little bit of bite resistance in case a walleye or something, or pickerel or something grabs your bait. A fluorocarbon leader is going to last longer than a mono leader too, because it doesn't stretch. But if you're new to this rig, maybe a mono leader might be advantageous, because again, you can feel it stretching, and if you're gripping your line too hard. But yeah, that is the rig that I use for panfish and trout. Now again, for those of you that are beginners, remember tip-ups are a great tool for finding panfish. They're really not the most effective way for bringing panfish onto the ice. Once you find a school of panfish, chasing flags becomes inefficient. The most effective way to catch panfish is to jig for them, and you can just, pull them out of the hole one after another using a jigging rod. But tip-ups are a good tool for, setting out over a large area. If you know that there's a school of panfish somewhere on a bay on big water, tip-ups can help you locate where the school of panfish are and where they're moving to. But in general, if you're really targeting panfish, you most of the time are going to want to be using a jigging stick to bring them onto the ice. One last thing I'll show you. Last thing I'll mention, again, using this rig with the weights and the fluorocarbon leader leading to a hook. A great general multi-species rig that you can do is to do the same setup with a 25-pound test fluorocarbon leader. Again, where I live, the trout aren't too finicky. I've even caught trout out here on steel leaders. Stock trout aren't that finicky when it comes to what leader you're using. In the Adirondacks and stuff, it's really important that you use like an 8 or 6 or 10-pound test leader. Around here, it doesn't matter as much. And if you're just looking to catch absolutely anything, just target just general multi-species fishing, I'd suggest a 25-pound test fluorocarbon leader. That'll give you some bite resistance against pike and muskie, which can bite through your line still, but they're less likely to. And yeah, that's just a great rig to do. You can catch catfish, you can catch, again, stock trout, you can catch walleye, you can catch bass. That's what I'd suggest is just a general multi-species rig. Do the same rig with the barrel swivel, the split shots, and a medium shiner on a 25-pound test fluorocarbon leader if you're just looking to target anything and everything. Now, in terms of your main line, of course, you're going to want, lighter main line for targeting trout and panfish, heavier main line for targeting pike and muskie, and somewhere in the middle for bass and walleye. If I was rich, conceivably, the best case scenario would be I'd have 5 tip-ups for trout, 5 tip-ups for pike and muskie, 5 tip-ups for bass and walleye, but I've just got 5 tip-ups that I use for everything, so I run 30-pound test on them, or usually actually whatever's on sale at the end of the season. I think this tip-up here actually has like 15-pound test line. One of my other, just remember, what tip-up has what line on it, so you're not gripping the line too hard. But yeah, I usually just buy what's on sale at the end of the season. I don't really get too excited about mainline. The rig that you have at the end of it is what the fish are going to be seeing. That's really what you want to focus on when you're rigging for each particular species. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you learned something. I could keep going and talk forever about each of these different species and where you want to set the tip-ups and what depth and things like that. I mean, trout and bass and all these species, pike too, can vary where they're hanging out in the water column. But I'd say if you're a total beginner, in general, 10 feet of water is a great place to start. You can catch trout in 10 feet of water, you can catch bass, you can catch walleye, you can catch pike. You can pretty much catch anything in 10 feet of water. As you get more used to ice fishing, you'll start to learn seasonal trends and where the fish are going to be at what depth when. But in general, if you're just starting off, if you have no idea what you're doing, I would say go into approximately 10 feet of water and do one of those rigs with the fluorocarbon leader that I told you about and put it a foot off the bottom, or even less than a foot off the bottom, a couple cranks just off the bottom, and you're probably going to catch something on a tip-up, be it a pike, a walleye, a bass. You're going to have action, and again, as you do more research on these species, as you get onto the ice and become more experienced, you'll start to learn more where you want to be targeting these fish when, and what depth to have your bait at. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope that last little bit of information is helpful. I'm just, again, throwing that out there for those of you that are total beginners, that have no idea where to start. 10 feet of water, just off the bottom, fluorocarbon leader, medium shiner, great place to start. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll catch you, hopefully, on the ice, catching some fish on tip-ups. So real quick, we'll go over how to... This isn't even. Boop. There we go. So real quick, we'll... Get the F off of there, you... So first and foremost, we'll go over the classic northern pike rig. Here comes my cat. So first and foremost, we'll go over the classic northern pike rig. Here comes my cat. Murky, get your fat butt out of the video. Murky.